Madam Deputy Speaker. Women in my community have been shaken to the core by the abduction of my constituent Sarah Everard. The ongoing investigation means there is only so much we can say, but the response to the appeal and the investigation shows that Sarah was much loved, and my thoughts and prayers go out to Sarah's family, her boyfriend and her friends at this unimaginably difficult time. Sarah's disappearance has left so many women feeling unsafe. And with the theme of International Women's Day, I choose to challenge the disgusting victim shaming that we have seen since Sarah's disappearance. It should go without saying that victims of gender violence are not to blame. Sarah did nothing wrong. All she did was walk home. And it should not be luck that sees us home safely at night. It should be our fundamental right respected by all. So on Saturday, as the sun sets, I choose to challenge the reality that being a woman means I am unsafe, and I will join Lambeth councillors, Anna Burley and Jess Lay and others who will be leading a vigil for Sarah and reclaiming our streets. And as we reclaim our streets in unity, I ask all women to remember what that unity means. Earlier this week, the world watched as a biracial woman recounted her struggle with mental health and her experience of racism. We then saw how easily and vocally people berated her and refused to believe her, even other women. So I choose to challenge a feminism that is not intersectional, that all too easily forgets the impact of racism on so many women. It is wrong for those who have never faced racism to discount the experience of those who have, just like it is when men discount our experiences of sexism and harassment. Our allyship cannot be selective. Madam Deputy Speaker, in our country, 1 in 4 black women die in childbirth. I know this pain all too well. My own pregnancy nearly killed me, and my daughter did not survive. The children of black women have an 121% increased risk of being stillborn and a 50% increased risk of neonatal death. As women, we are told it's just one of those things. But staggering health inequalities and outcomes tell a different story. And like me, when you relive the experience again and again, it's not hard to find the instances where you are perceived, or if you are believed, as a black woman make all the difference. I want to pay tribute to the work of the campaign 5x More, who continue to raise awareness and call for change, and I hope this House will give members the opportunity to fully debate the issue of black maternal health. And I choose to challenge a world in which all women do not have the equality they deserve. Thank you.
Bel Ribeiro Addy, you are the MP for Streatham, and you were the former shadow immigration minister under Jeremy Corbyn. You are also one of the first MPs in Parliament of Ghanaian descent. So thank you for coming on the platform. It's an absolute honour to have you on here.
Thank you.
The first question I'd like to ask you is, please tell us about your early life and growing up in Brixton Hill.
Well, I grew up in Brixton Hill, just behind Brixton Prison. And although it's Brixton, it has always been a part of the Streatham constituency. Definitely since I was born. You know, boundaries move every now and again. So Streatham and Brixton were both my town centres, and I'm the youngest of, I'll call it 6, 5 technically, but my mum raised my cousin. So I grew up in a house, lots of kids, lots of family around all the time. Something I definitely noticed has probably changed amongst my generation is first generation migrants had a lot of family events. And I think that was about, coming to a different country and trying to keep those links and those roots in a place that was slightly unfamiliar. So I spent a lot of time around cousins, uncles, aunties, and I grew up around a time when there were a lot of, probably some of the issues that we still have now in terms of racism. I heard about it quite a bit. I would hear arguments with older brothers and older cousins about going out late at night and why this would cause problems if they were stopped by the police and things like that. I grew up against the backdrop of the apartheid. I remember one of the first kind of news pieces I remember was that image of Nelson Mandela and Winnie Mandela walking down the road, crowds of people cheering, and discussions about how that Black people in South Africa were going to be able to vote for the first time. And I remember thinking to myself, how is this the first time that people are allowed to vote in their own country? I grew up against a backdrop of all of that in quite a multicultural area. and I suppose going to university in Bradford was probably something completely different. It was a completely different world from Brixton Hill. I suppose that opened me up to the rest of the country. But in terms of being young, that's what I definitely saw around Brixton Hill. Diversity, definitely some community tensions, and a world that was grappling with loads of different issues, including apartheid and general unrest because of a range of different issues.
Thank you so much for that answer. And one thing that's particularly remarkable about you is that you were the former chief of staff for Diane Abbott prior to becoming an MP. So why did you make that transition from becoming an MP to from being the chief of staff for Diane Abbott to becoming an MP?
Well, being Diane's chief of staff was an amazing opportunity. I actually came into her office kind of by accident. I was studying law. And as most law students should, I ran out of money because it's expensive. And I remember at that time, actually most of my family were living out of the country. My brother was up in Leeds. He was between Leeds and Germany with his wife. My other brother was in America. My two older sisters had taken some time to go and work in Ghana. My mum was between Ghana and here because she had retired and she had moved over, and I was pretty much here by myself thinking, gosh, things are difficult. But I'd always been involved in campaigning, and through that I'd met Diane, and she actually had somebody in her office who wasn't feeling very well. And Diane's a fantastic boss. She is. So when her PA wasn't feeling too well, her PA would do a lot of the correspondence in her office. She didn't want her PA to be worried about someone coming to take her job or being replaced. So she thought she'd bring somebody into the office that her PA knew and that was doing something else and would just cover something. So it worked quite well around my law lectures, just coming in and doing some work for her. As I'd worked on her 2010 leadership campaign, so she knew that I shared her politics and that I could write for her. And the rest is kind of history. Her PA came back and then left again, and I was still there. And it was fantastic because I was able to have probably about 5 different jobs in Diane's office. I handled the correspondence at some point as a parliamentary assistant. As a parliamentary assistant again, I handled all of Diane's community work. So all of the different campaigns she was involved in, I was also involved in, so I was able to maintain that link. And a lot of the campaigns she ran for the Black community right across the country, London across the country, so London Schools and the Black Child, Black Women Mean Business. And I had the opportunity to organise all of these amazing different events, from events about the politics of Black hair to reparations. So there was never a dull day, and there was never a month where you wouldn't see Black people queued up around the block outside Parliament to come and attend an event hosted by Diane Abbott. And that's something that was always really important to her. I think Parliament always seemed like quite a strange place for Black people to be coming into. I think people don't realise as much it is the House of Commons for the common people, and you should be able to come in and attend events with your MP. So that was great. And then Jeremy Corbyn won the leadership, and Diane became his Shadow International Development Secretary, and I was promoted then to become her political advisor for the International Development Brief, which was amazing. We travelled to a lot of places, looking at the refugee crisis right around the world. And then for a brief time, Diane was the Shadow Health Minister, Shadow Secretary of State for Health, rather. And I had the opportunity to work on that campaign, which my dad was very happy about because it meant that I used that degree that he was wondering what I was going to do with. I did my first degree in biomedical sciences and philosophy and ethics. And I went on to do a master's in medical law and ethics. And throughout that time, I was campaigning, and I just got involved in different campaigning jobs. And after that, Diane achieved, I suppose, what she'd always wanted to do, be the Shadow Home Secretary or the Home Secretary in government. And, it underpinned all of the work that we had done. And at that time, I was the most senior person in her office and became her Chief of Staff. But actually, the title Chief of Staff came about because not for a reason of, I don't know, wanting a fancy title, because it sounds quite grand sometimes, doesn't it? But is because as a black woman, as a younger black woman, definitely working for Diane, I needed people, and she needed people to understand that they had to respect me. And in order for me to carry out her job for her, they had to understand that when she sent me to do something, it was with her, her full consent. And for everybody in the office to understand, regardless, yes, I may have been a young black woman, but again, I was leading the office and things like that. So that's how the fancy title came about. But really, yes, there were a lot of political discussions. It was a lot of hard work, and I suppose working for Diane Abbott for a black woman is probably the thing to put you off politics the most, because you get to see firsthand what it is that people do to you if you are a black woman in politics. And actually, not just that, if you are a black woman in politics who like Diane, is prepared to stand up to certain things. And I suppose I got to a point where I was, going on, things were changing, and I started to think about what I wanted to do, because as far as I was concerned, I still wasn't in a career. And people were a bit like, what do you mean you don't have a career? I'm like, I don't really have a career. I'm just doing a job. Even now, I don't feel like I have a career. Technically, I think some would establish that I do. But I began to think about what it was that I wanted to do. And I thought, I need to give myself a year. And by chance, the very grace of God, I thought it's something that perhaps I could do. And about the time I thought it was something that I could perhaps do, the member of parliament for this area, who was Chuka Umunna, who strangely enough actually got me to join the Labour Party in 2010, he decided he wanted to be a Lib Dem. Now, I don't believe in any area, regardless of whether or not you agree with individuals, because of the issues with black representation. I would never have thought to just stand against another black person within my Labour Party, or challenge somebody in my own party to remove their seat. I think that's wrong. But if you're in a different party, you're not on my team anymore. and that space was open. And by December, at the end of this year, where I thought I had to give myself an opportunity to think, we had a general election, and I won my seat. And I suppose again, the rest is history. And I was given the opportunity to represent the area that I'd always lived and grown up in. I think probably I'm quite strange for a young person living in London. Most people have lived in loads of different places. I spent 3 years in Bradford at university, and other than that, I've only literally lived at 2 addresses within a mile radius of each other, which sounds kind of sad, but this is the thing.
No, it's really incredible, particularly when you talked about the challenges that black MPs face, which is not always something that we know from the outside. Some of the challenges that the MPs face on the inside, unless it comes to light in the media. So following on from that, you are a vocal Christian, which is amazing to see, but you're also a very prominent black female MP. So how do you manage, following your faith-based convictions alongside furthering the ambitions of your political party?
Well, I don't think there's any kind of difference. I have this one Tory friend, just one, and I keep arguing with him, and he's a Christian too. I keep arguing with him that Jesus was a socialist, and Jesus. look at the story of the 5 loaves and the fishes. What did he do? He broke them up and he gave them out to everybody. That is socialism in action. And he keeps shaking his head and whatnot. But strangely enough, and I was actually quite shocked, I put together my first piece of literature, and someone advised me, to tell people who you are. And this is when I was going for selection as the Labour candidate. Tell people who you are. And I thought, tell them everything. I'm a Christian, and I've grown up in this area. And some people took issue with it. Some people took issue. They said politics should have nothing to do with religion, and you shouldn't. What does that have to do with anything? And what does that mean? And does that mean you are anti abortion rights? Does this mean you are anti LGBTQ? Does this mean you're this? Does this mean you think that? And I had the opportunity to explain to some people who did question me on it. And I said, look, for me, yes, I feel like being a Christian underpins my work. There are so many different things in the Bible, and there's so many different ways in which people interpret them. But ultimately, we were giving a very, very clear message. And that clear message was, when Jesus left those 2 commandments, they're all the commandments. No one's saying get rid of all of their commandments, but 2 commandments: love God and love others. And you cannot love others unless you are actively standing up for them. And that's how I reconcile my faith with my work. And that's how I think really my faith drives my work. It's not my place to judge you. It's not my place to make comments, or it's not my place to criticize, really, unless someone's doing bad to someone else. But it is definitely my place as a Christian, if I'm going to love you, to stand up for you.
Let's head over to Bel Ribeiro Addy. Bel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the government's own legal representatives admitted that it breached procurement law by persistently failing to publish details of COVID-19 contracts. The Good Law Project had also exposed the wholesale failure to comply with obligations of transparency, and questions remain over the $500 million worth of taxpayers' money spent on PPE deals with companies who were Tory donors. Does the Minister agree that this is reflective of the government's failed response to the pandemic, and that this lack of accountability has completely damaged confidence and trust in this government?
Minister, go.
I don't quite agree with that. I think it is fair to say that we do need to be vigilant when it comes to the use of public money and awarding contracts, but it is the case if we look at, for example, personal protective equipment and other goods that were sourced during the course of the COVID pandemic. 99.5% of the goods that were sourced were operational and effective. And of course, we were also procuring at speed. There were suggestions from across this House as to some of the companies that we should have contracts with. Not all of those suggestions were necessarily absolutely spot on, but what we did do was to make sure that we prioritised those companies who were capable of meeting the needs of the hour.
That's really incredible, because some people struggle to marry faith and politics together. So when you just given such a powerful answer that I know that will resonate with those watching this interview. So following on from that, it's the Bristol protests, the Kill the Bill protests. I want to focus upon firstly the peaceful aspect, the peaceful protests about legislation that is being passed that is quite concerning. You've actually given an alternative and defended that alternative, which is the Protect Everyone bill, which I think is really inspirational and powerful. How do you think that will protect our civil liberties? Because right now, with the legislation that the Conservatives hope to pass, we don't know if it's going to go through yet. It could threaten our liberties and our freedoms to protest about the things we feel passionate about.
Well, I think it's first to point out that the right to protest was a hard-won fight, and it's made so much difference around the world. I started off talking about what's happened in South Africa, and apartheid wouldn't have ended if people hadn't protested, not just in South Africa, but actually across the world. And I think about all of the different protests that people have held in this country, the suffragettes, and that wasn't always what people would call it civilized and peaceful protest. The miners' strikes, the right for the rights of the miners, that's not always what people would call civilized and the poll tax, those were actually riots. So there have been many different times in our own history where we've seen things descend into a certain way, but it's my belief that the police are there to protect people. And by giving them these powers, they're effectively politicizing the police, asking them to question our politics or dictating to the police what is right and what is wrong. And all they're meant to be doing really is keeping us safe, not policing our views. And that's a real attack on our civil liberties. And I think about that particular, well, not just the coronavirus act, but the Policing, Crime, Sentencing and Courts bill, where they were effectively, removing the rights of Gypsy, Roma and Traveller people. Again, another group of marginalised people, effectively criminalising their existence and the way in which they live, when we should be supporting them. I think it's right that people are standing up to it. Obviously, it's important that people are peaceful at all times. I know these things descend occasionally into something else, and that's not right. There should be no violence. But we also need to think about how that the police as an organ of the state reacts to people. Some of the images we've seen are very, very worrying. Some of the figures which we've seen in terms of particularly Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities and their interactions with the justice system are appalling. And we need to challenge all of those where we can. And I do believe, some people are so upset with the police that they're just like, we don't need any police. I'm not saying we don't need police, but in this country, we're meant to have a proud tradition of policing by consent. And in order for the police to police us, they need to work with communities. They need to listen to communities, and they need to keep them safe on their terms, not in a dictatorial way.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. One thing that comes with being a prominent MP is sometimes you get trolls on social media, people that have nothing better to do than to tear somebody down that's doing well. But we're now living in an age where lots of young people now are also being targeted. They're facing cyberbullying, they're facing all these kind of things. So what advice would you give to such young people based upon your experiences on an MP having to deal with these types of comments on a daily basis?
Well, it's so hard because people say to you, just don't look at them. But if you can see them, how can you not look at them? So I suppose it's just, and like I said, it is hard. I look at some things, they do affect me. Even not just looking at things about myself, I used to look at a lot of abuse in regards to Diane. And that I also found very hurtful, because she is someone, obviously, like me, a Black woman, looking at people throwing this abuse by her is very damaging, is very hurtful. And I actually remember when I first announced that I was standing, and Diane very excitedly retweeted it. And then right underneath it, first person pops up and says something horrible about my weight or my face. And I think he called me ugly and fat or something like that. And, my heart just sank. But one thing that Diane has always said is that the more you stand up for things, the more you say things, the more horrible people are going to be to you. And you have to be ready for that. You have to take time to look at the nice comments, because people do say nice things. Some people do say nice things. And actually try and do what you can to change it. So challenging social media companies, it's taken a while to get to where we are, where they've made some amendments to their platforms that allow you to, so for example, now you can actually stop someone who only has like 20 followers or something from commenting on your post. And those are usually bots or evil people who set up accounts just to say horrible things to others. But I think they need to go a step further. And this is something that I'll continue to challenge. I believe that people should be able to be anonymous online when they want to. I think that's absolutely fine. But your right to be anonymous shouldn't interfere with someone's right to live free from abuse. So that I believe that social media companies shouldn't allow people to sign up to use them unless they provide their details. So that if you do, when you go on there, break the law, and some of the things that people say are effectively breaking the law, that you can be challenged, and you can, and I think if people knew, they could be prosecuted. So back in the day, Diane always says, when you wanted to abuse your MP, you had to send them a letter. People started to get caught because you could find out where it came from. You could track DNA and whatnot. Now you can't track anything. And really, if you want the responsibility of being able to hold a social media account, which with the words you say could impact lots of people, you should understand if you use it incorrectly, there will be consequences.
Incredible what you say there, because there's lots of parents that I'm sure would completely agree with you when they have to look at the abuse their children face based upon, maybe their sexuality or their ethnic background. So what you're saying there is quite powerful.
Yeah, it is so damaging to people's mental health as well.
Yeah.
And we've seen suicides from it. I mean, that is just, it's just so sad. And in order to take it seriously, there needs to be some decisive action.
On the 22nd of April, it's going to be Stephen Lawrence Day. And, his murder was really shocking. But since that took place, how do you think the police has progressed from there?
Well, I think, unfortunately, we've seen rollbacks since then. So after Stephen Lawrence's death, and bearing in mind, till this day, some of the perpetrators have not been brought to justice. Some have, but some haven't. I'm really proud to be a member of the Society of Black Lawyers, and they were actually the organisation that put together the legal reasoning as to why Stephen Lawrence's murderers could be tried again, which is what ended up with the additional murderers eventually facing some action. But there are still some people at large. and you know, growing up against that backdrop where it was clear that you know, their institutions were racist, and then seeing the Macpherson inquiry, and the Macpherson inquiry looking not just at Stephen's murder, but everything that touched and discuss it. And that's a true way to do a proper inquiry, the way in which the Grenfell inquiry really could have benefited from. And looking at all of our institutions and everything, and, you know, coining the term institutional racism and looking at ways to, and coming up with those recommendations, which we actually began to put in place. The problem with equalities in this country is it's always seen as an add-on. So as soon as things got tough, or as soon as things seemed a bit difficult in terms of money, all of those things got washed away. And now we have rolled right back to a position where we've seen a race report which denies the existence of institutional racism at all, which, you know, it is really sad, because I think it's taking us back to before the Macpherson inquiry. And whereas we saw small gains with the change in government and with the change in priorities, you know, we with that report essentially wiping out a good few decades of work into challenging racial injustice in this country.
Yeah, thank you again for that answer. And the life of an MP is like really stressful. So what are your hobbies outside of being an MP?
Hobbies, gosh, can people have hobbies? You know what I would say is one of the things that's been most difficult about being an MP, because I'm quite a private person. I'm even can be quite shy and quiet at times. However, I know that for the purpose of my job, I have to do interviews like this. I have to speak to people, be confident in what I'm saying. But sometimes I just want to not be known. I would do this thing where, you know, as life got busier, the easiest time to speak to your friends is on the way to and from work. So unfortunately, I might have been that loud person on the bus, just chatting away to my friends in the morning on the way to work and on the way back. And one day after being an MP, I was having a long chat with my friend, and then somebody came and sat next to me and started, "Oh, hi, Bel, you know, hi, campaign." Oh my gosh, I cannot do this anymore, because people are now going to be listening perhaps to what I'm saying. But no, I think being around people is probably my best. I like to travel, which is something that we have not been able to do in this past year, which is quite stressful. I love concerts. There is nothing like live music, and I can't wait to. We've missed a whole festival season. It's just, there should be a report into the impact of missing a whole festival season on people in this country. It's heartbreaking. And yeah, concerts, festivals, live music, new experiences, traveling. I love stuff like that. I love seeing family and things. So hobbies, would you call them? Yeah, perhaps. I like movies. I like funny. I like very, very stupid films. And I think people are quite surprised at some of what I like, because that's really, it's just dumb. That's not even, yeah. But things such as that, I like to laugh. Oh, and comedy shows. When can we go back to comedy shows after this pandemic? Yeah, things such as that. I think, especially with my job, and especially now with all of the really kind of hard things I have to hear from people, and people really are suffering. It's important to find the joy in life where you can.
Yeah, it's really, really cool just to find out about all your hobbies. And I'd just like to also just say also that, you know, throughout this interview, I'm just so moved by your experiences, everything that you've gone through to get where you are, and just how you're just such. It's nice for me as a young Black man to see a very prominent Black MP that is, you know, really resonates with, you know, people within my community. So it's just been fantastic just to learn from you. So following on to my next question, unfortunately in your constituency, a really shocking event happened, the death of Sarah Everard. And there's lots of women that feel, you know, targeted maybe through sexual harassment, jokes that are completely inappropriate, things like revenge porn, and all of this kind of stuff that's going on that is really kind of sexist and, you know, just awful. So how do you think society can work together to ensure that women are better protected?
Well, I think a lot of work needs to be done. I mean, you've heard a lot, probably around this time, a lot of discussion about sentencing and things such as that. I mean, at the moment, we've got the Victims Commission who said that rape is it's essentially decriminalised because it takes a long time for a rape case to get to court, even if it even does. And when it does, the perpetrator is not even given that much time. And sentencing is important in that it shows what we value in society. And I was a bit worried again with the policing crime sentencing courts bill because people were going to get up to 10 years for, perhaps violating a statute, but they get significantly less than 10 years, if any time at all, when they violate or harass a woman. But we can't stop at sentencing because people aren't going to care what they do if they know that effectively they're probably not going to do any time for it. So we need to look at culture change. There's an issue about the culture. And, we're taught as women that it's just one of those things. If people, call at you on the street and things like that, that's something that you just have to accept. So it's going to take, I suppose, teaching young men in particular, and actually teaching women that these things are also unacceptable. And it's not something that we just have to take. One of the things that happened in and around Sarah's disappearance initially, when there was an appeal going out, is that a lot of women in the area then started to report incidences that happened to them in the past few months. And so that showed that before that, they didn't really have the confidence to come forward. They didn't think that anybody would take them seriously. And that's wrong. We need women to be taken seriously. Firstly, we need a culture change. And also we've seen so many cuts to the services that provide support for women in these situations. And those need to be refunded. I mean, we are over half the population, and still we are being treated this way. And people talk about majorities and whatnot. And if we're speaking about that, then women's safety needs to be taken more seriously. And unfortunately, with what we're doing in terms of sentencing, culture, and just funding, it's just not.
And you made a very interesting point, and I'd just like to ask a question off the back of that. Is that how do you think young men can hold their peers to account? Because there's this whole lad culture. I'm a young man, I play, with a group of guys, every week, and hang out with my friends. But there's maybe jokes, maybe a culture that exists among us that we're not challenging enough. So how do you think we can do that effectively in a meaningful way that makes life easier for women?
Well, I think first it's being that young man that speaks up and just says, look, yeah, that's not cool. That's not, I mean, you hear so much horrible language. You hear it in music, you hear it in just some phrase. Even speaking to my nephews, I'm like, no, I'm like, well, what is that? Is this what people say? Like, this is just awful. But I think it's just removing that type of language from language. It takes awareness. It takes, I suppose, educating people and not berating them. Sometimes it's very hard when people feel berated. Sometimes they get defensive instead of, changing their behavior. And then that's when they come out with statements such as, oh, it's not even that big a deal, blah, blah, blah. But actually explain to them why it's an issue. I remember there was a time, and, people don't really say it now, people used to use very homophobic and disableist language. So people would say, that's so gay. And they didn't actually mean it was gay. It was just a slur for something. And it was ridiculous when you think back at it, but it took time to educate people that that's not okay. And disableist language, you're a psycho, or are you blind? Some people do have psychiatric illnesses, and some people actually are blind. But because they become such common phrases in our language, it takes time to weed them up. But it is a conscious thing. Just like being an anti-racist is a conscious thing. We have to consciously make the effort and the decision to change our actions and our language.
Thank you so much for that answer. Really, really powerful. And final question I'd like to ask you is that you're a huge inspiration to people within the BAME community. So what advice would you give to young people within the BAME community that aspire to make a similar difference in Parliament that you have?
Well, firstly, I would say to them, don't go into Parliament because you want to be a politician. And that's my personal view. Others have it different. There's nothing wrong with just wanting a career in politics. I personally came up through campaigning, through wanting to change things. And I think if I had just wanted to get into politics, whatever that's supposed to mean, I firstly don't think I would have a compass, my beliefs. And I think people generally, in terms of the people we're meant to represent, they find it really hard when politicians just kind of wish and wash between what it is they say they believe, because it's just about politics and not about people. So I would say have an agenda. Even if I don't agree with your agenda, or people don't agree with your agenda, there are a lot of people in Parliament that do not agree with me. But believe in something. I'm more like to respect someone that believes in something, even if I don't agree with them. But just know that actually they truly believe in it. They're not playing games. They're not trying to one up someone, keep their position, and they're actually doing it because they believe that's the best thing for people.
Thank you so much for an exceptional interview. I've learned so much from your experiences. You've given so many thought-provoking answers, and just thank you for such a great interview.
So thank you, Micah.
Bel Ribeiro Addy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The government benches admit there is a crisis in policing in the criminal justice system and courts, and the publication of such an interminably long bill speaks to that. Members of the public may be left wondering, given that the party opposite has been in office for well over 10 years now, who is responsible for the multiple crises. Over that time, we've had innumerable pieces of legislation on these matters, on policing, criminal justice and courts, including statutory instruments. Logically, we can draw the conclusion that none of this legislation has dealt with the admitted problems and may have even exacerbated them. We should not expect this bill to have a different outcome, because it's not designed to address fundamental problems. It's designed to infringe on our civil liberties. It's designed to prosecute culture wars, where a statue can expect more protection than a woman, where damaging public property can get a longer sentence than sexual assault. This bill doesn't even attempt to address the crisis of plummeting conviction rates for some of the most serious crimes, including rape. Reported rapes are soaring and almost reached 60,000 last year, but barely 2,000 resulted in prosecutions. The Victims Commissioner has spoken of the effective decriminalisation of rape in this country. Ministers are fooling no one when their default response is to talk about tougher sentences and more police. But tougher sentences are useless if the perpetrators can reasonably expect never to be convicted. More police on the streets are a waste of time if they are instructed to prioritise guarding statues. The new bill seeks to make that style of policing commonplace, with a major focus on powers to prevent non-violent protests, such as Saturday's vigil in memory of Sarah Everard, whose family we continue to hold in our thoughts and prayers. This follows in a rapid succession of legislation which provides legal immunity for both members of the armed forces and police, even in cases of rape, torture and murder. Historically, we have been policing by consent in this country. This government seems intent on ending that. More armed police, more random stop and search despite the evidence of racist discrimination within it, ploughing on with the failed Prevent programme, and this very, very obvious demonisation and disproportionate impact on the Gypsy, Roma and traveller communities. And now the suppression of peaceful gatherings and protests. This is draconian legislation. It will not make us safer, and it should be opposed by everybody who believes in democracy. Thank you.